Hey, Tim, you're muted.
So, where are you today?
I am in St. Paul today.
Oh, okay. So, oh yeah, back with the white bookshelves, but we're in
Yeah.
a different view.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at them kind of diagonally. Yeah, this it's a studio apartment, so this is like the room. There's a little kitchen behind me and there's a little closet
And
and bathroom in front of me. But it's not much. So this is meeting three for this book? Is that right? Yeah. No, it really isn't. Actually, it was a delay. So this is meeting two. I had it wrong. We delayed a week and then we talked um, about just a couple of chapters and the why the future doesn't need us last week. It says my internet connection is unstable. It shouldn't be unstable. It should be rock solid. I switched
yeah,
from
so,
I switched cell phone
so,
carriers, and all of a sudden I can't get things like YouTube videos while I'm
so
walking
this is the
outside.
third
Hmm?
week, but back in the event.
I'm sorry?
Um, and didn't quite get to the start of chapter 7
Hmm.
last time. So you want to start chapter 5 or something this time, right?
Yeah, I think I was thinking of probably, kind of starting because he begins chapter five, I guess we'll wait for other people to show up, but he begins chapter five talking about, this he was motivated by this simple question. If the technology is supposed to be so good for everyone, what just happened in 2008? So,
Yeah, I mean, if I remember rightly, 6 or 7, chapter 6 or 7. It's very much into the early computer days where it's not about networks, but Walmart through the clever stuff,
mhm.
amongst others,
Yeah.
that just completely trashes the old style supply chain. And we we had a similar in the UK. Carrefour, who was the big hypermarket people as opposed to the supermarket people, gave the UK a run, and there was two, maybe three, um, Carrefours open. But for whatever reason, because Carrefour is a hypermarket that has quite a lot of its own branded stuff,
Hmm.
it didn't sit as well as it could with the UK. We were in the full, whatever the version of the EU was by then. And so we could, particularly in southern UK, you could jump on the train or jump a ferry with your car, or essentially you and a mate hire a van, and of course there's no customs excise anymore, so you could go and fill the van up with 25 weeks worth of French beer or Belgian beer or Spanish beer
Hmm.
at French or Spanish prices. And it took a while before the powers to be decided that there were limits to the fact that you could raise one person bringing back 2,500 litres of beer
Hmm.
um, on a weekly basis, almost, because some people basically set it up as a business. And so all of a sudden they weren't using their personal allowance So that gave a little pickup to car four, but it wasn't quite enough. So in the end, a British company called Asda took him all over, and Asda became a British manufacturer as well of the cheap end of clothing, etc. etc.
Mm.
It then turns out that what we know as Asda is Google. And they then started using all this technology that's in the book, the use of networking type stuff to drive the efficiency, etc. Um, it's still around. It was when I looked last back there. There's a really big one out of Bristol. Um, there's another big one on the way into the between London, Heathrow, and London proper. Uh, and they also hived off some of their clothing out of the big stores into clothing only stores. They seem to be doing well. They're around here. We don't get items, we get car fours, we don't get women, we get clothing from them. But H&M just seems to be taking everything over. Smooth,
Mm.
we all seem to be in the cycle of somebody gets a leeway through some bit of tech, like the taking off here.
Mhm.
And
Well, and
they,
Walmart, the way that Jaron is telling this story, Walmart
he,
is like a
I ended
generation
up
ahead,
now having to
right?
make three accounts with Amazon, a US, I can get stuff as published in the US. But my main UK one, and because I'm not paid for the bank within the UK, it doesn't compare to me. And I have one here because they opened up here. And it's like, oh, it takes 2 weeks to ship to the UK, 2 days to ship if I do it locally. The
Mm.
only, the only problem comes is back when I was working at Atlantis, it's the biggest building in the region back then at the end of a pond, and it's 50-50 of whether I could find it on the day. Well, roughly half of my deliveries never arrive. And it's like, you deliver today, I know because my office is next to the mailroom. I see you guys colleagues have had deliveries today. Where's my CD? Where's my book?
Mhm.
Um, and we never did figure out why half of it didn't turn up.
Uh-huh.
But clearly the technology doesn't work as well as it should be. Have you turned your motion-based tool
No,
following
I think it's
on?
still tracking me. I just changed the screen aspect or whatever.
Mhm.
So we were talking about, kind of continuing on, but we hadn't really gotten that far last week. And so I had sort of backed up in my sort of view of the ebook all the way, sort of back to chapters 5 and 6, where he sort of, is kind of defining the term still. And I thought it was interesting that he did sort of express this question of, well, if all of this is supposed to be so good for us and so positive and so, so net positive, what just happened in 2008, and how was that possible? And I thought that was, that maybe is kind of an interesting place to start. I guess as far as housekeeping goes, before we really get going, Eric, did your friend decide to come or not, or any idea what's kind
He
of going on?
he is interested in coming, but he said he's probably booked up till early October. So I said I'd just keep him up to date on,
Cool. Yeah.
where we slop in and out of weeks and or what the next book is.
Okay. Great. Yeah, that'll be fun to have somebody new. And other than that, anybody want to talk about all of the craziness this week? Um, was a crazy week.
I,
Chris, you're
Yep.
muted.
Why, what happened?
Thoughts and prayers?
Yeah.
I know.
mean,
Yeah.
You have
my
a new UK ambassador, or about to get a new one.
Hmm.
yeah.
Because Mandy,
Yeah.
the Dark Lord, has got booted because of nothing new.
Offended the Dark Lord. You mean Peter Thiel?
No,
No, the
he
other one,
yeah.
Epstein.
Randy had the name before Blair got hit. He was in opposition to Dark Lord.
Yeah.
In that case, if we want to stick there for a moment, I can highly recommend the Q&A session of Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart for this week. Alistair, Rory didn't really know Mandelson, but Alistair was quite fit for a long time.
Hmm.
The rest is politics, right?
But his husband doesn't like Campbell and thought he stuck the knife in at some point. So they doesn't see Mandy as much as possible. But Alistair gets really slammed in the comments to that Q&A about what he was doing, when he was doing it, and Mandy was supporting Epstein while he was in jail, and yet Starmer still decided it would be a good thing to have this guy be an ambassador to Washington.
Hmm. Yeah.
As a political appointee, not a diplomat. So all of the diplomats are now going, we've got a chance because they dare put, I doubt they're going to put a non-diplomat in.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
safer bet.
Yeah.
It's
It's
non-fiction in.
in the context, one of the things that I was thinking about is in the context of, kind of what Jaron has been talking about in, generally,
Mhm.
and also in this book. One of the things that strikes me that some people, I think even I think Glenn Greenwald did a half hour on it, or at least 15 minutes and a half hour the other day, was just sort of the, kind of the visceral nature of, kind of what we're seeing online now.
Mhm.
I mean, there was the, initially when the Ukrainian girl was murdered on the, on the public transit, they stopped, with the guy, standing up and getting ready to stab. And then, a day or two later, people just couldn't be satisfied with that, and so they had to see the whole thing, of her, being stabbed and reacting to it and dying basically on, on that public camera. And then the increasingly, graphic videos of Charlie Kirk getting killed. It's, is in a way, it's sort of like, is this what we bargained for? Is this what we asked for? Um,
Mhm.
and Glenn Greenwald was saying, well, there are some people, yeah, apparently conservatives in the U.S. Congress who are sort of calling for, calling on platforms to not allow this stuff to be seen. And he's kind of objecting on sort of First Amendment, but on
Mm.
kind of a nuanced First Amendment argument, where he's saying, well, I would certainly hate, for my children to, view again and again and again and have shoved in their face everywhere they turned, a video of me being, publicly executed. Um,
Mhm.
and yet, so yeah, so yeah, what do people
Yeah.
think about this in the context of,
It,
this whole thing that we're
That
discussing?
that
it,
particular piece is interesting to me because I have a 14-year-old who said to me she almost immediately saw a really graphic video of his shooting And I actually heard about it and saw some, initial news. And then I was like, oh, yes, we're in a social media world where 50 people probably got this on camera. Where is that?
Right. Yeah. Every
I
college
actually
student.
went to look for it
Yeah.
and searched for it and could not find it in
Mm,
a 5-minute Google search
Hmm.
specifically. Look, I should have probably looked on Twitter or three other
Hmm.
places.
yeah.
But I figured, okay, I'll give it 4 or 5 minutes. And I couldn't find it, but yet she saw it instantaneously.
Yeah.
So that is a
Yeah.
kind of weird thing. And in the past, almost always, most social platforms have turned those videos off,
Hmm.
Yeah.
especially when it's, a mass murder situation. They'll, because usually the people who do those videotape them and try and put it out there, which then usually attracts others. Um,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well,
but
Yep.
one of the what the other thing that I thought was screwy is the and I'll term it just the far right as an easy way to put a moniker on it. Um, always wants to deal with the kind of immediacy of the situation and not worry about the farther reaching impacts of what else is going on or
mhm.
where they want to play
Yeah.
the finger pointing game. So there were several, particularly, House and Senate people who immediately started pointing fingers and saying, this is going to cause other things. And instead of blaming one individual who was responsible for it, they want to blame the entirety of the left that they view as the enemy,
Yeah.
which is
Right.
just an idiotic framing to begin with. And that's the kind of framing that gets us into way more trouble, particularly in this
Yeah.
political situation we're in now.
Right. Right.
But
Well,
But
and I do think that they have a point about, you know, the discourse has been getting cruder and cruder and cruder
yeah.
and more and more um sort of not necessarily all calls to violence, but adjacent to calls to violence. But that's been on both sides, right?
yeah,
And so so the idea that this is some type of and I heard that the president had said something about I don't care about about the right, overreacting because we always have, I mean, his point was that he was trying to make in his deluded, perspective on it was we always have cause, whereas the other side never does. And so they, and the person who I saw was reporting on that was Emily Jashinsky
Hmm.
on Sagar and so Sagar and Crystal are on the two sides. Emily's in the middle and she's reporting on this. And Emily is very very conservative and and usually tries to give the current administration sort of the benefit of the doubt and find a way that that what they're saying could make sense. And even she was saying, you know they need to take a breath
Hmm.
and think about if they can now back away from this position because if if they act on those on those sentiments, it's going to be bad. And that was I thought kind of an interesting moment.
Hmm.
But actually, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because my son popped up and started texting me about 10 minutes after it happened because he's in college and like things spread like wildfire in college.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Are you watching the news?" And I'm like, "A, why are him bringing up something related to the news?" I'm like, is a little unusual. And then thinking that in the middle of the day, I'm watching news.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "No, what's going on?" He had hit like news had spread and everybody pointed to Twitter. And he was just like, yeah, he's like, this is just graphic videos, like a wall of graphic videos. And as we chatted a little bit, he's like, it's now turned into like World War III on Twitter. He is
Mm-hmm.
like, it is just a wall of hate. He's like, it's usually a wall of hate. And he's like, particularly since Elon came in, like took out all the restraints, he's like, it is just a free for all.
Sure.
He's like, you may have been right by leaving.
Mhm.
And he's like, he sent me a link. I'm like, I can't. Twitter has like suspended me, and they anything with any relation to me, like
Oh,
fingerprint,
wow.
I'm
Wow.
like, I can't see it.
Hmm.
And so it was just kind of funny, but it was like having him like he's like this has gotten to be way too much.
Yeah.
And he's just like it is just he's like he mostly follows it for sports
Yeah.
and things going on there, but he's like yeah, he's like this just isn't healthy.
Yeah. Right.
And
Well, and to the extent that, assassination, political
yep,
assassination is performance, and in that sense,
yep,
is terrorism, right? Because the objective is,
yep,
the reaction to
yeah,
the people who see it. Yeah, I mean, is this actually that was how I found out about it too. My ex texted me and said my daughter Vivi, who's she's away at college, was worried that there were going to be riots on campus. And I said,
hmm,
why would there be? I responded, why would there be riots? And she said, Charlie Kirk. And I texted her back and said, why is he coming to campus? And she responded, no, he was just killed.
yep,
And that was how I found out about it. But yeah, and I don't think there were any disturbances on her campus,
hmm,
which is in, kind of it's probably like most, college towns in outstate Minnesota are a blue bubble in a red sea kind of thing.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah,
yeah. It's kind of it's sort of playing out like I half expected it to, which is that the right essentially was blaming the left, and it turns out it is the kid was tied to the farther right,
possibly, yeah, yeah,
and
I heard it, yeah.
it's just like and the odd yet stupid thing was the administration shut down the domestic terrorism surveillance,
Mhm.
which could have caught this,
Yeah.
and the group that he seems to be a part of was one of the ones that was very much in their sight,
Mm.
and they're just like, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want to impinge on anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That will be incredibly ironic if while saying that, this guy is, from the, sort of, Antifa left, that he's less, or,
Yeah,
and maybe not, completely aligned, with anything, right? I mean,
yeah.
it seems like the messages on the bullet cartridges, were kind of going in different,
It's
in several different directions. I mean,
they're all they're all memes and framings from Gorpus, which is a white nationalist, just like really out there.
right,
And
but the
it's all in 4chan, and they're claiming him. They're like, "Oh yeah, he's one of us."
right, right. But the whole, but they've, sort of apparently grabbed on to, sort of generic anti-fascism,
Yep,
the Bella Ciao song is a,
yep,
is a long-standing, anti-fascist, uh,
yep,
thing, going back to,
yep,
the world wars. And, and something that I think
yeah.
is, has had,
But yeah,
less extremely and obviously, negative framings in the
yeah,
past. I mean, it was that,
it's
it was made
yeah.
famous most recently by, what was it called? Casa de Papel, right? The Money Heist series
Hmm.
on
It's
Netflix.
also yeah, it's also in a war game, like a video game,
Mm,
and it's the number two song on the Gorpus music playlist.
mhm.
And so they claim it as one of their songs and just a rallying call,
Wow. Yeah.
whichever direction they it had a government class in high school where, or I think it was high school or it might have been first year in college, where professors, teacher was just like drew the circle, a political spectrum where it bends back on itself.
Yeah. Right.
And it's just like you get into these sort of the wings and the edges start looking like each other.
Very much. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and as these things sort of leave fiction
Yep.
and become, and become reality, it becomes much more
Yeah.
problematic, right? I mean, it's one thing to, to sort of rally behind, the guys in the dolly masks and,
Yep.
Money Heist, or or the V, the V for Vendetta mask, right?
Yep.
Or the other one is the other big one of the big three is the Monopoly guy mask, right?
Oh yeah.
From the Rami Malek thing, Mr.
Yeah.
Robot, right?
Yep.
So, so the three masks that had been I mean, V for Vendetta. I mean,
Yep.
just by itself, if you start taking that seriously, and if you start thinking about that actually happening in real life,
Yep.
sort of sans the 1984, totalitarian state that he's
Yep.
reacting to, um, it gets really problematic really
Yep.
fast.
Yep.
And people can imagine themselves in a much more dystopian world um,
Yep.
than they really are. I was listening to lighten things up. I was listening to the comic Jimmy Carr, apparently
Hmm.
surrounding the release of his new book that has come out this year. Did sort of the rotation, right? So he was on Modern Wisdom, and he was on Rogan,
Yeah.
and I think the first one I listened to him on was neither of that. I think it was Diary of a CEO. And he's kind of an interesting guy. He's kind of a stoic, and he's kind of got these, and apparently his favorite quote ever is also one of my favorites. It's William Gibson saying that the future is already here. It's just unevenly
Yep.
distributed.
Yep.
Um, which is kind of when you stop and think about it, really profound. But the
Yep.
converse is also true, right? The past, the medieval past, is also still here and
Right.
unevenly distributed.
Yeah. I created a term uh, essentially around the William Gibson quote called the every now, which is you have everybody is in their own understanding of the future, what I don't have, what is coming.
Mhm.
And then essentially, if somebody's getting a fax machine today, it could be a transformative device. But that is like 30, 40 years in our past for many of us.
Right.
But is that is there now, but it's like I've continually sort of pushed at. We are living in the widest every now that we possibly have ever had as humanity.
Yeah.
And it just, those stretches and gaps quite often collapse.
Mhm. Which actually, from the perspective of the Graeber thing, right,
Yep.
where Graeber and Wengro were saying, we used to have human societies used to have all of these different potentials and used to exist in so many different ways, and people could imagine all these different things. Um, maybe what you're saying is that's still going on. It's just that,
Hmm.
that we don't notice it, or we don't think of it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It sort of tangential to like Kirk being shot was the people had no clue who he was.
Yeah.
It was just completely out of their understanding and framing. They're like, who is this? Why does this matter?
Right.
Why is this on the news?
Yeah.
And so it's just
Yeah.
you have all these different realities all at the same time, and some people's future is other people's past.
Yeah.
And it's just I find that just really interesting. And it's like you'll have multitudes within individuals on different domains where it's like they're farther advanced in one area, they're farther back in another, and that sort of every now is that capture of that gap.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of
Well,
interesting. Yeah, initially, I mean, I knew who he was, recently. I remember when he first kind of appeared on the scene, I mistook him for what was his name? Kirk Cameron, right? Like the child actor who had become kind of for a little while, for a moment, sort of a conservative talking head,
Hmm.
right? But then it had sort of petered out, and then all of a sudden, this guy with a similar name, popped up, and so I confused them for all. Yeah, the
Yep.
other thing, the other term that Gibson coined recently was jackpot, right?
And
In the series that became a TV series, the
yeah,
Peripheral, and
peripheral. Yeah.
then the one that comes the sequel to that, the
Yep.
jackpot is that moment when we went beyond the tipping point. But
Yep.
it was a diffuse, I mean, the way he sort of describes it, it was this sort of diffuse thing where it wasn't like everybody
Yep.
knew. at that moment that that we were in free fall, in the water, in the barrel in Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
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 The other thing it marks that no one has really said anything about as it relates to the media, um, Charlie Kirk, in a great instance, is the first influencer content creator to be killed publicly as a thing. So even if you take the politics away, just the what he was doing and how he did it
Hmm.
within our
Hmm.
media landscape, he is the first, YouTube, content creatory,
Yeah.
influencery type to
Right.
be, and not only shot, but shot in public,
In public.
Hmm.
you
While
know.
yeah, while the feed was running. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's going to be 3 weeks before that piece, I think, is really because
Mhm.
a lot of this too is it's in amidst all the coarseness of everything that's going on and there's so much crap that it's like
Mhm.
most people can't take it. Something like this happens and it becomes a shock to the system and almost no one can process it.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a while, particularly because all the other silly shit is going on.
Yeah.
Literally to the fact that the United States attacked Venezuela this week, and we're not talking about that.
Right.
Like,
Right.
Hmm.
to me, that is fucked up. We're talking about an influencer,
Yeah. And
and
that's
what
yeah.
is ostensibly, people are saying, an assassination, but there's no evidence really that that's the case because we don't have the guy. We really don't know his motivations yet. So it's
Yeah.
just a weird public killing is what it is. And,
Yeah.
you know,
We
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I think yeah, the idea that this was the first killing of an influencer. And oddly, I watched it was sort of movie night last night at the end of
Hmm.
the week. So we watched A Face in the Crowd. Um and 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 Andy Griffith was really uh I mean, turns out to be an actor. That was really kind of unsympathetic
Hmm.
as Lonesome Rhodes. But that I mean, he kept, we kind of, paused in shock and looked at each other. He used the term influencer at least a couple of
Hmm.
times, claiming, I am, this is what I am an influencer. And I thought so it was very, very timely. The
Yeah.
other thing,
It was
go ahead.
the other piece that was like the night before or the evening before on the 9th was the tranche of the 18,000 Epstein emails, which is what tipped the British ambassador out. Um, and like
Yeah.
that was like way down. That was a long scroll to get there on any news media on that day.
Yes.
And it's just like it plays heavily as to American news.
Right.
On Guardian and BBC, it was number one story,
Right.
and Bloomberg had picked up the stack of emails and had been going through them and had published a bunch of things out. Yeah, also the Colorado shooting as well. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of things got pushed down the list. Um, one of the things,
there was one other thing too that I thought was odd, that was not well reported, but there was a potential school shooter who was arrested prior to a shooting
Hmm.
based on tips, and they found guns in his house, and the
oh,
arrests were for, you know, unsecured guns and potential charges pending against his parents for
Hmm.
not having registered guns or something like it. But it was like weird low level stuff, but it ostensibly looks like they stopped what was a massive shooting, but when you look at the arrests and what evidence there is or isn't, it sounds almost like this kid may ultimately get off. And
Hmm.
hopefully, if he manages to, he will find some help, and the pressure will at least have everybody on edge when this guy is around at school, or he'll
Hmm.
get kicked out of school. But
yeah.
the fact that even though they found this kid and there's things as a result that would hold him, it's a very hard thing to do and enforce at a bigger scale to help prevent more mass shootings.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Those things almost never get any kind of play in terms
Yeah.
of how do we make it easier to find these kids that are going to do this and prevent them. And here's like one case that actually happened and just totally lost in a sea of way, way too much other stuff going on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the, I mean, a lot of the response to this seems to be to sort of circle back around to kind of the pre-crime surveillance world that, that Jaron is kind of,
Yeah.
on the edge of talking about, in this book as
Yep.
well.
Well, these siren servers that we talk about, people posting in and out of them, it
Yep.
should be relatively easy from a kind of big data social science perspective that these siren servers should be able to quickly identify potential shooters or suspects, unless they're going to be total Unabomber Ted Kaczynski's where they're just not on those media at all.
Yeah.
Would
If
be
they if
able
they happen to be doing
It's
all of their crazy business in the same silo.
yeah.
Or if
well,
somebody like the Total Information Awareness, project, which became the Terrorist Information Awareness, which became
mm,
Palantir, has
yep.
a window across all of those domains. Go ahead, Eric.
Yep.
Well, and I think Thomas may have already alluded to why this didn't work. That information was there. The presumed shooter was turned in by family,
Yep.
Oh yeah,
right? So
this
so
this guy, yeah.
all the the concerns that Jaron is reflecting don't seem to be playing out in a criminal scenario, right? They're good at finding, we want to buy toothpaste,
Right.
but
Yeah.
we see repeatedly it's not these tools that are helping us solve crime.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yet we're investing substantial portions of our economy into building them and
Right.
are
Well,
using
and it will be interesting if the dust ever does settle and if we ever do get an accurate view into this, to
well,
find out, which we probably won't. I mean, 99.9% says we don't.
Or it gets
Whether
covered up.
they
You
actually
know,
were making any headway behind the scenes,
right.
before
Yeah.
these people came forward.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know.
the one thing that shocks me in all this too is every single former president put out a statement or made a statement roughly to the fact of, we're Americans. This is not who we are. We don't resort to
Right.
political violence to solve our problems. Every
Mhm.
single one of them within hours.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also within hours, Donald John Trump gets on TV. And his was a video recorded, and he literally says it's the radical left, and he pointed fingers and essentially said, "We need to go get them," rather than, and it was a lone wolf call. We need to go get them without even saying who specifically. And here's the guy who
Who's
has the
them and who's
power.
we? Right. Yeah.
He's got
Mm.
the power of the FBI to go get the guy. And he's not talking about let's go get the guy. It's let's go get them, the radical left.
Them, the
Yep.
insiders. Well, and,
And
and Eric,
and and he's
maybe
literally
our
on
hope is
TV.
what Eric's saying, that Patel's a
You
dipshit.
know. Well,
Mm.
but he's literally here's the leader of the free world on TV saying, "Let's go get the left."
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
blaming, rather
I hear you.
than
I hear you.
every single other president's trying to tamp down the situation, and here he is literally ratcheting it up
Yes.
and
Yeah.
doing the same thing that Charlie Kirk has been doing for the last decade, you know.
Well, but here's
Yeah.
the thing: is that knowing who he is and what his limitations are, and the history of what was done to him
Hmm.
by way of lawfare and and persecution and elevating to felonies 34 kind of bizarre little misdemeanor counts that other people hadn't been prosecuted for. How could he feel otherwise? Now, I'm not saying that he should have articulated that in the way that he did, but how would a guy with that and with what we understand about his intelligence and his worldview and, and everything, how else could you expect him to react? It's yeah, and
Oh, yeah, I'm not surprised at how he reacted
yeah.
at all. Um, I I'm really more surprised at the fact that there's so many identity voters out there who are still willing to follow him into the abyss of crazy that, you
And,
know,
well, but do you think that the way that whole agenda against him was run and prosecuted bears any responsibility for that at all?
well, there's also a disconnect in what we're doing as a nation of laws. We're also beholden to the game of politics and the play out of who's what where, and the fact that there's gerrymandering going on, because I think there are a much larger number of Republicans in power now that otherwise wouldn't be if we actually had kind of free and fair elections. So, this president has now been impeached multiple times and has only been let off because the political game has saved him,
I,
not the law. So it's
I
the
disagree, Chris. I don't think that he was impeached on anything that was
well,
significant that came up to the level of significance that that really qualified as high crimes and misdemeanors. And I think I think that public opinion seems to bear that out, and that I think has earned him a lot. I mean, it's almost like I guess
well,
my argument, my thesis is not so much that a lot of this public that you're talking to as still being behind him is as pro Trump as as maybe kind of the left fears. I think that it is much more anti-left than they're willing to believe or admit, because I think that they have so misplayed every lever of power that they had, and misapplied it, that they've lost credibility with half of the American people, or
so
51% or
e-
whatever.
so even if those things in term one don't rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors, there are now situations in the current administration where he has gone against posse comitatus,
Yes,
law of the land for centuries,
yes.
for a century or more.
Well, and,
He
and he's probably
he
about to go after habeas corpus.
he's
Mhm.
suspended habeas corpus in innumerable times with ICE raids.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
and
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 I agree with
and
you.
the
I agree with you
politics
on
of the
that.
Supreme Court, which he has packed,
Yep.
carefully over time, are now allowing him to like play free reign. But I would say with no doubt whatsoever, he has made an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and he is actively, in part because he hasn't read it and doesn't understand it, he's actively going against that oath,
Yes.
which is
Okay.
literally the worst crime on the planet.
I agree with you
You
on
know,
that. But
and
how is he different?
there's no
How is he
system in
different
place to protect us
from
against
the
that.
previous administration or the one before him, his first term, or the one before that, I mean, I think that these people are all failing to protect and defend the Constitution. I think these people are all war criminals. I think um, you know, eh, there's a lot to unpack, and and I think that the things that we choose to focus on are not always they may be the most kind of politically salient at the moment, but not, yeah, I mean, Chris, you were saying that, the things, okay, you were sort of waving at the things that he did in his first term, and you said, but but these new things, and I agree with you. some of these new things, but also some of the things that, that were never remarked on, that happened in the Biden administration, under the Biden, especially around COVID, and the suppression of questions and, real, I mean, a real documented attempt to subvert free speech, especially online. You know, we
Well, there's also the things that we don't see about and don't hear about. And this particular administration has been documented as saying, we're going to have our meetings in person and no one take notes, so there's no paper trail.
right.
Don't send emails about these things, so there is no paper trail to
Or at
prove,
least don't do it on an unsecured Slack line.
you know. And then they're doing those types of things too, where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we're actively subverting national security protocols, and they still have not held anyone to account in that situation, where in every past administration, whoever that person was that created the Slack and let data go would have been summarily fired and just out on their ass in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And so what worries me is not only what's happening, but literally it's happening so fast now. At the same time, no one is being held to account for anything unless it just everyone gets upset.
Yeah. Well, there does seem to
So upset that you have to bounce them out just for the PR issue,
yeah,
rather than the actual
the fact that they're
happened issue.
incompetent. Yeah. Well, and there does seem to be a lot of protection. There seems to be a lot of very visible protection of incompetence. I'm not sure that that's entirely unprecedented in in recent administrations either. But to kind of pull it, maybe try to pull it back a little bit to the book, the things, some of the things that I was, that were jumping out, in that section where he's talking about, he's sort of complaining about differential pricing, but he's saying, that the kind of the root of this is this information asymmetry, right?
Mhm.
And I think that bears on, kind of what we're talking about here.
Well, the one
Yeah.
thing that gets me about this book too is he makes some broad brush strokes that sound good at the first level of analysis, and I kind of wish he would get into second and third order effects of some of the more complex economics of what's going on, and he doesn't. And it's really, not well footnoted, or it's not
Yeah.
broadly discussed. How do you puzzle these things out? And it goes back to our, constant reminder of Graeber saying we as a society have a choice of how we're going to choose to live, which seems to be getting harder and harder to make those choices of how we live because of how things are arranged currently. But it's I feel like there's too much like surface level stuff that he's discussing, rather than getting into it like Zuboff does.
Yeah, and the notes,
Yeah.
in the Zuboff. Yeah.
And I've kind of delved into chunks of her book, but I need to do a kind of an analytical cover to cover read.
I feel like I do too, but I need to take like 6 months off.
Yeah. Well, that's
which
the thing,
Zuboff?
is there's stuff that's popping up in this book that I'm like, I want to spend 3 weeks just on chapter 4.
Yeah.
And delve in and do some of that kind of underlying research, or, I found myself making notes and going back to other books like Cesar Hidalgo, who is a physicist and information theorist, but who works in economics, wrote a book in 2015 about how information grows. And there's some interesting economic stuff that overlaps, like chapters 4 and 5, I think, here, and our work with that. But it really, I want to delve into it and almost do a PhD level thesis on what's going on within the economics there, because it's to me, it's a lot. It's it sounds logical, but it's very hand wavy, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of unpacking that needs to be done in some of these things.
Yeah, I agree. And a
He
lot of this stuff is very anecdotal.
yeah.
And you know, as also is, you know, like I think I mentioned last week, you know, the Brad Smith book about in Microsoft, right?
Mhm.
And, you know, and a bunch of these other, you know, and even, you know, and I thought it was kind of funny because as I was listening to it this time, I noticed that Lanier uses the term filter bubble, right? So he's already sort of
Yeah.
absorbed that whole thing, and you know, and is kind of, I think, working from an assumption of that as a kind of a
Well, hey,
foundation of the
this
universe.
is 2013 too, so filter bubble was a much more prominent
20
word. Was
Oh,
it
it's
20?
2010.
Oh, maybe 2010. Or
Nope,
maybe,
it is 2013. You're correct.
okay. I was going to say maybe my printing of the book was 2013 too, and
I was gonna say that if it had came out first in 2010, I do remember he mentions in the thing that the part that I was listening to yesterday, 2012 or 2013. So he
yeah.
Okay.
I
added
mean,
that.
I do also keep reading this with the filter of that was written yesterday, and I was like, oh, there's so many things he's not mentioned that have happened in the last
Yeah.
decade.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
provide additional evidence on top of what he's saying, which,
Mhm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Well,
which,
and
Yeah, the data science piece. Well, I agree strongly with Chris because he uses might and may an awful lot in his initial framing of things,
Mhm.
and I'm like, that's not a really and like setting up a foundation with might and may.
Mhm.
I'm just like, okay, that's carrying an
um,
awful lot of of
Yeah.
work.
knowing what,
Um,
but knowing what his background is in computer science,
yep,
um, he's almost using those words. You see those words might and may in are like
yep,
heavily built into
Oh, it's like C.
the
yep,
well, no,
Like
they're built into
while statements. Yeah.
all the basic documents that underpin the internet.
Mhm.
yeah,
There are spec when you write a spec for what
yep,
happens on the internet, there are very specific definitions of what might, may, should,
yep,
and are requirements
Mhm.
yep,
are
Yeah.
very well delineated, and it all some of the times he says those words, and because he's a computer scientist, that's immediately where I go to is
Yeah.
these other
yeah,
more strong definitions of might and may.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah. The
yeah, so he's actually kind of living inside of the algorithm to some extent. Well,
yeah.
and so my question about that is how much of what he's talking about as he's describing these things is a straight line to the AI world that we're living in today.
there are pieces like the data science piece is somewhat forward thinking, which I was thinking it from a framing of 2010,
Mhm.
which most of this stuff had been around for at least 5 years and just sort of common, and his framing of it was off, which I found kind of odd. Um, and just sort of how he lays things out and how it works and how it functions and the could is also had been happening, but he didn't quite get it right.
Are you saying as off as in incorrect or off
Yeah,
as in
incorrect. It wasn't, there
from a
were pieces that were incorrect, but also just sort of, it doesn't really work the way that it was laid out fully.
Hmm.
And it was the econ piece was really off. Well, it was missing core pieces and core foundations with Laffer because Laffer, it was simple assumptions that it was based on. But
Hmm.
the problem was they didn't understand how wealth worked, and wealth wanders.
Hmm.
So if you are decreasing taxes on the wealthy, they are not spending it locally, that wealth wanders.
Right.
It doesn't, most of it didn't stay in the US. It, bought properties and luxury items globally,
Right.
and it hurt the US. And they were buying companies, externally and putting money in and training externally.
Right. Right. Well, and
And
that's and that's
it's
the and that's the thing. That's always the thing with any kind of externality, right? Is that
right.
it can be, the gain can be in the center, and
Yeah.
the cost can be way off in some
Yeah.
recognized periphery, or it can be an unanticipated consequence, that's
Yeah.
way down the line in time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Because David Stockman, who was one of the core economists behind Reaganomics and leaned heavily on Laffer curve and the sort of mid 2000s, 2010 or so, he had a speech where he was like, yeah, we did not understand how wealth works, and it's, wealth wanders, and like we were just completely, our assumptions of what this was going to do were just drastically off.
yeah,
And it just,
yeah,
the decreasing taxes does not,
yeah,
it doesn't work the way that we think it does.
right.
And he sort of changed, and then he sort of came back to it. If you could put constraints on things.
Uh-huh. Well,
Um,
and a large part of that was sort of a desperate attempt to once again be relevant.
yeah.
He kind of
Yep.
revisited and revised a lot of that stuff. I always thought that kind of the big flaw of the Laffer curve was its marketing.
Yeah.
And it's branding. The idea that, oh, he made, this was something that he drew with a ballpoint pen on a cocktail napkin, and boom, and everybody's head exploded. And, which I guess was a way, I mean, it was almost sort of kind of a proto-populist moment, right? That this is a regular guy, doing a regular guy kind of thing in a
Hmm.
bar,
Yep.
not a pointy-headed,
Yep.
economic theorist, with his
There,
pocket protector.
Yep.
there are times when we've been watching the news and they're talking about economics, and my kid has said, in response to whatever economics is going on TV, she's like, doesn't everybody know, like even even the Gen X idiots who made Ferris Bueller's Day Off know that this economics does not work this way. Like,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
that's
we got,
the famous desert island joke. First we
Yep.
assume a can opener.
yeah.
Yep.
Or the other one that I think goes to Sagan is that, for if you want to, if you want to really define if you really want to bake an apple pie from scratch, first you have to, build your own universe,
Hmm. What does from scratch mean?
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so Pariser was
Yep.
2011, and I think that Ezra Klein, the
The
whole
book
Why
was
Are We
2011,
Divided
right?
book was about the same time, wasn't it? Or was that a little bit later?
Which
Um,
Ezra Klein book?
the Why Are We Divided book.
Yeah.
Because I think
Well,
that that kind of fed off the same, kind of
Yeah.
set of
I mean, I assume Pariser got the contract for the book because of discussion
Huh.
before, right? So it's not like he just
yeah.
made it up and the book appeared,
Hmm. Yeah.
thin air.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think he started talking about it, while he was still doing his move on.
Blogging, basically.
Yeah. Yep. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So it's probably beyond where we were supposed to read this for this week, but I got a chuckle out of the Ted Nelson section. I was actually
Mm.
I was listening while I was walking, and I had walked into, this liquor store down the street, and I was looking for something, and so I'm looking at, and it was it's one of these, hipster liquor stores that has, all kinds of, crazy things that I've never heard of. But that the staff will be more than happy to, to tell you about, for hours at a time if you let them. But, as I was looking, I was listening to the part where he was talking about sort of the cult-like aspect of the Nelson,
Hmm.
sort of the Nelson history, and his, this kind of, which actually went a long way in my mind, and I had sort of forgotten that part, but went a long way to, to kind of answer the question for me, why wasn't Nelson taken more seriously, and why wasn't, his vision for, for the web, and, and hypertext,
Hmm.
bidirectional linking,
Yep.
kind of taken more seriously. But
Yeah. I liked in like the sort of interstitial piece that he had with the 10 humors,
Mhm.
which I really liked him laying those out. Um, and having Ted Nelson as sort of being the last one.
Hmm.
But it was an interesting. He didn't take those where I thought he was going to, but they're really good playing pieces for being able to frame areas of thought and how people think within sort of tech community and even broader. Um, and the, yeah, and then it's kind of funny because an awful lot of the sort of Trump adjacent tech folks, which are sort of a really small part of the tech community, and even like the Billionaires Club and all the others, it's a really small smattering of them.
David
But
Sacks.
most of them are using like eight of the first eight. They have like glommed onto all eight of them and the frailties and poor thinking across all of them, and held on to the poor thinking and brought them together. I'm like, this is, I hadn't thought of that before. I was just like reading it and going, holy crud, this is the core corpus of like, you know,
Of the PayPal mafia.
the
Yeah.
PayPal, yeah, half of the PayPal mafia. The other half is just like, these guys are insane.
Yeah.
Um, and call them out regularly. And then there's
Who's that? Who's doing the calling out?
um it's the one guy I can't remember, and then the Reid Hoffman always calls them out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But there's three of them. Like nobody thought I know David Sachs, and just because was helping around the edges of Yammer, and I'm just like there was just really poor thinking there, just
Mm.
incredibly poor.
Mhm.
Um and but like Elon got booted by them early on. And it was just Teal sort of held stuff together, but he was always in tension with the other. There was five founders, and the other two, he was always in tension with them, and they were trying to keep him in check.
Mhm.
And David Sachs was just sort of floating in the wind, and just sort of people that I knew that were around early PayPal just sort of called him just sort of a marketing, just sort of, he would do whatever was asked of him to do.
Mhm.
He didn't really lead much,
Mhm. Yeah.
but it was. I'm trying to. Curtis Yarvin is also. I have friends who know him and had worked with him like early on in the 90s, and they're like phenomenal engineer,
Mm.
but they're just like he was just outside of coding, just nuts.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh,
I wonder. I was wondering about. I haven't really kind of followed Hoffman that much. Are
mm.
his objections, kind of principled, or are they kind of partisan? Because I know he's.
They're essentially he points out where they will make claims based on X, and they are false claims. There is not a correlation between what they are claiming and what they are using as the foundation for what they're claiming.
Oh, oh.
And so he's just it.
He's basically
He's just
saying
like,
they're bullshitters.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't remember the other guy's name. Um, but yeah, it's the last one, sort of a Russian or Eastern European name.
Okay.
But it was just, yeah, Reid Hoffman stuff and his take on it is really interesting. And he will just call out, and it's like, you're pointing to this, but this actually says this, means this.
Mm.
And yet you're claiming that it means this other stuff. But a lot of it is Yarvin's misinterpretation of just all sorts of stuff.
Mm.
His stuff gets really bizarre, and which is sort of their cornerstone for all the stuff that they're doing. And they try to protect him as much as they can.
Interesting.
And so
One of the things that struck me about Jaron's position is that he
yeah,
he seems to really try to downplay his attachment to Microsoft,
yeah, it,
which I think is a little bit problematic.
it, I don't,
Well, he
so
he he does kind of in the book say,
he mentions
I
that.
am in this space, I'm
Yeah.
of this space. So it's kind of like you got to watch out for the things I say because, and it's like any good historian who's writing a history is somewhere they'll say in the preface or in the book jacket or somewhere in the book, here's who I am,
Here's my
these are the
bias.
people, so you gotta, or at least so future historians will say, okay, they may have had some bias here, but usually they flag those things
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think that the way he seemed to me to be pitching it was, yes, this might be a little bit suspicious or problematic, but it gives me access
Yeah.
that is the basis of everything that I'm telling you here. So, roll with me.
Well,
Yeah.
he also comes off to me as a technologist who seriously looks at some of the stuff he's doing or that others around him are doing
Yeah.
to a level that they're not, or that
Right.
they actively, blindly, misinterpret. So you can look at, in fact, been, the algorithm has been feeding me more and more, and in part it's because I am interested in um, early histories of Christianity, orthodoxy versus heterodoxy,
Mhm.
all these different flavors.
Mm.
Um, but I have been seeing a bunch of, they're not really, you could term them takedowns, but they're much more nuanced and educated, where they'll take, you know, Charlie Kirk's discussion of his perspective on government and Christianity, and
Mhm.
somebody will
Mhm.
ask him a question and he'll throw out 4 Bible verses instantaneously saying, oh, Daniel, chapter 6, verse
Tuesday.
whatever says we've got to do X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
But then, there will be somebody who has a a PhD and
Yeah.
semiotics and religion who's
That's
like,
that's
no,
not what Daniel
let's
actually
look at
said.
these
Yeah.
chapters and verses and put them
Mhm.
in some more historical context.
Yeah.
And it literally, the Bible is saying the polar opposite of what Charlie
Right.
Kirk
Right.
says it's
Right.
saying.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
is actually what Thomas was just saying about the PayPal mafia.
And
Yeah.
and when he says it with such conviction, you kind of want to believe that Charlie Kirk, who can quote chapter and verse so rapidly and readily, knows what the hell he's talking about.
Yep.
But when you
Look with the
actually
grandmother and the Waltons.
you only need to spend like 2 minutes actually looking at any of those verses and know even a tiny bit about the Bible to know, oh wait, no, he's literally perverting
Mhm.
Mhm.
the
Okay.
not only the word, but the word of God. Like,
Yes. Since you brought us back to this, Chris, this was something that I jotted down and we passed it by, and I thought, okay, I'll give it up for now. But yes, this religious moment that we're in right now with this whole, I mean, these people who have become prominent, mostly on, in the right, podcastistan, blogosphere, you know, Candace, Charlie, Megan Kelly, all these people who JD Vance, right? People who lead with their religious commitment. And there does seem to be, and even other people who are not taken to be, sort of religious evangelists in, podcast space. Like, I think, like Brett and Heather, right? Are Brett Weinstein, Heather Heying, and they spend some time in their book talking about, these things that are ideas that are, factually false, but metaphorically true, right? Or, and I think their use of the word true, sort of includes uh, adaptively useful, right?
Mhm.
Evolutionary sense. And I think that they've been developing, although I think both of them still claim to be atheists. I think they've
Mhm.
been developing this idea about the usefulness of religious commitment and that is, and I think that there's a lot of, and I have to like take 6 months off and really think about this because I've sort of come to history with this sort of commitment to the secular, right? To this Thomas Paine, kind of tradition that, that Enlightenment liberty in the old sense, the John Stuart Mill sense, of the term, came out of this secularizing tradition. And there have been just in recent years, there have been a lot of pushbacks on that historiographically, right? Like Michael Rechtenwald, who is a big conservative, actually, as it turns out, too, wrote a book about secularism in 19th century England, which I read and I disagree with a lot, but I haven't had a chance to sort of address it yet. But I do that. But I actually, it has all of this moment has sort of brought me to question my assumption that society is better off the more secular its institutions are, right? That
Mhm.
separation of church and state was kind of, a key, important, good founding
Well,
idea.
it's kind of an underlying thing to a liberal democracy that by splitting off and in some of the worst things on the planet have been done in the name of religion,
Yeah.
and
Yes,
as we see right now, continue to be done.
right.
And it's because there's so much in the Bible, and people are not able to properly read it, understand it, and interpret it, that they'll interpret it in, you can take any Bible verse almost and use it to underline your particular position. And it's very hard because it's so ingrained into Western culture.
Well, also, it's so
It's hard to
inconsistent
cancel
as a
that.
corpus that you can justify anything. You can find
Yep.
something in there to justify anything you want to do.
But the
Yeah.
but the issue is most, the far right wants to say, oh, the Ten Commandments are the end all be all, but they forget Leviticus has got 613
Right, yeah.
commandments.
Yep.
Yep.
And the issue with most of Christianity right now is, well, we can pick and choose which of those 613
Right.
we
Yeah.
we want to enjoy.
Well, I
It,
love those videos. I mean, they're not, I don't think it was Charlie Kirk, it was somebody doing the Charlie Kirk thing, saying, okay, now should we stone this person who's wearing, the two fabrics, and
yeah.
that kind of thing. So
It,
yeah, but so I think that, yeah, and I'm not giving up, Chris, on my idea
Yeah.
that more damage has been done by organized religion. My question is it Will and Lynn? Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
Well, that's
it,
the issue too, is there needs to be, as in all things, you need some kind of check and balance to
Yep.
hold power to account.
But
And when
linen, because
it,
linen is from Egypt,
mhm.
and they're the enemy, right?
Yeah.
So
It,
there's, so my issue is, though, that the is this idea that there is a I think I'm willing to kind of consider the proposition that removing religion and removing, kind of the imperfect and incomplete, sort of moral foundation that Western Judeo-Christian ideas um, give a society, creates a responsibility to make your own, which I
so
think a lot of people who think of themselves as being agnostic or atheist or post religion haven't done the work to say, okay, I'm not going to believe what the Ten Commandments say or what they teach in church or or whatever. What am I going to believe? And I think
mhm.
that's a legitimate critique, right? That instead you get, just, materialism and justification, for whatever it is that you want to do.
so
Yeah. There's,
when you say, Dan, you use the phrase Judeo-Christian, which when you say it has a very benign flavor to it.
hmm,
But in current modern political discourse, it has a whole different
In Mike
white
Huckabee
power,
discourse.
it has a white power Christian nationalist
Yeah.
origin
End
in the
times.
19,
Yeah.
in the 1950s.
Sensationalism. Yeah.
And if you watched, let's say, and it was probably starting in the mid 90s, Bill O'Reilly with fire and brimstone from his bully pulpit
Uh-huh.
underlined every phrase with Judeo-Christian values,
Right.
which means something very specific to the Christian nationalist movement.
And it wasn't.
But
And it
when
probably
you use
wasn't.
it, I don't
That
think
was a
you're
dog
using
whistle. Right. Right.
you're not using it with that dog whistle thing, but
Oh, not at
because
all.
it
Yeah.
has
Not at all.
entered.
Well, and even like who was it? Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that wasn't. I don't think Alan
the other
Bloom was using it as a
in
dog
this
whistle,
context,
but the idea that if we're going to abandon something like that, something
Yeah.
like, the what used to be called the Western canon that my dad doesn't like to call canon, he likes to call foundation. Uh, but that if not that, then what? And then then sort of a free floating kind of hippie experiential gestalt from from the the period the period that Jaron nostalgically responds to, while not acknowledging that it was also MK Ultra, is a little bit problematic.
Yeah. The Judeo-Christian, I think that the white nationalists are using are sort of it's very much seems to be a post Judeo-Christian ideology because there is not much Christianity. And it's like every time they're quoting the Bible, it is all Old Testament. They
All Old
do not
Testament,
quote,
yeah,
there
yeah,
is nothing from Christ that they are bringing out.
right,
There is no love your neighbor as yourself. They have like even bastardized that. And it's like your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself, only if they look like you.
right,
And I'm like, they have like flatly said that. And they're like,
right.
oh,
Choose
that's
your
not my
neighborhood
neighbor.
and then love your neighbor. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. These
The,
I didn't these neighbors weren't here when I got here. I'm only choosing my neighbors,
Yeah,
from when I moved in.
right.
And so
well,
it's just
that's the thing too, is the entirety of most of Jewish life in antiquity, they were living in exile. They
yeah.
were living in Babylon. They were living, living in
Right.
Assyria. And it's like, how do you hold your faith while being put upon by the outside?
Or they were the outsiders,
Yeah.
Yeah.
literally, right? In the terms of you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of stranger have. Yeah, right.
Hmm.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, that would be a Christ-like sentiment from the Old Testament. Yeah,
Hmm.
but but not often, not often enough, kind of remembered. But the thing, but they were, the outsiders, right?
Hmm.
They were Cain,
Hmm.
right? They
Well,
were, they were
I
the,
wonder what it looks like 2,000 years from now.
but actually they were able. They weren't Cain.
What the diaspora of American Christian
Yeah.
nationalists looks like
Yeah.
2,000 years hence.
Can I just back up there? Rewind the tape for a minute. They're able, right? They're the pastoralist, right? They're the ones who put the meat wrapped in fat on the altar, and it smokes and it smells wonderful and God loves it. And Cain gets jealous and kills them, right? Because so Cain and the settled farmers are the enemy, right? And
Hmm.
so, so when Joshua comes in, right, he attacks the oldest city in the world, or one of them, and knocks down its walls, and and they go after the pre-Phoenician Canaanites, who are, not only, so, I mean, Byblos is one of the oldest cities.
it's not it's not Cain you should be reading.
It's
It's
what?
Daniel. It's not Cain you should be reading, but Daniel. But
Oh,
Daniel Quinn about the enemy being a settled farmer.
yeah. Daniel Quinn?
And Daniel Quinn in his uh, conversation with a gorilla.
Okay. Okay. Well, also, what's his name? Colin Tudge. He went on a little tangent about that in the Neanderthals book.
Followed on. It followed on. But the bit that I was going to jump in where we're talking about which bit of the Old Testament versus which bit of the New Testament and all of it. There is obviously that wrestling quote that was stolen from a radio show, the wrestling. But the one that always gets me is when you walk from Cairo to Jerusalem, it's it's a 6 week route march. Let's make it 6 months because you're partially. You've got to bring the old, the infirm, the pregnant women, the children, and the goat. And I know this was pre-GPS, but why did it take
40 years.
60 odd years or something stupid, right?
Yeah.
For somebody who knows how to draw a virtually straight line. And don't forget, in that context, I've been walking around that area for on and off for the last 40 plus years. It ain't that difficult. Right?
Mhm.
Even Lawrence of Arabia managed to cross the Desert.
Right.
Right.
Keep the Mediterranean on your
It wasn't
left.
quite fucking
Right.
desert either. So, and what I also picked up on, I don't think here, but was more in the last book actually. I think was the plain clothing bit where you were pushing back against the polycotton type shirt as opposed to a cotton shirt, and it's like, okay, what difference does that make? And ultimately, the difference comes through polycotton shirt isn't cloth, it's other things, as in you're oil based.
Hmm.
The poly bit comes from the polymers from the oil. So you can retrospectively, from a eco-fascist point of view, if you want to push it that extreme, push back against quite a few other things, versus etc., and give some reason. And it's like you look at farming here, um, what it should have been like, in the same way as you've looked at elements of how do you cross over from Siberia to what is now Alaska. Why is there a prescription against pork here? Because in the relatively modern time, not so much now, but 2,000 years, you couldn't rape it pork. You couldn't farm it sensibly. It would be too risky. Exactly, they're pretty much the same latitude. You go all the way over to Southeast Asia. And why would you not? Wet ground, pigs snuffling around, eating the bugs, finding the roots, etc. But you can't do here because they're just all the quantity.
Well, you can't
So
graze. You can't graze.
when you try
Pigs
and look at
in a
some of these things,
in the same
and
way
that
that
comes
you
up,
would cattle
pretty
or
sure
sheep
that comes up
goats
in
either.
Colin Crutch's little book too, which I have to hang somewhere. Um, the the thing that was missing, right, was that the whole of version 1, 2, and 3 of that supposedly good book, because obviously here we have the third more correct and absolutely right version. There's a certain amount within Genesis and Exodus area. Give reasonably step by step how creation should happen. There's a certain amount of logic to it, not great. But then we didn't truly really know the logic until 60s and 70s when plate tectonics finally landed. and plate tectonics, one of the little side questions that answered was, so why is the sea not as salty as the Dead Sea? Why is the general ocean not as salty as the Dead Sea? Or worse, it's because subduction takes water down into the geology area, takes the salt out, and pushes fresh water back up in the landscape. Or it pushes it back out unsalty but hot with other chemicals in the mid ocean ridges. So until you get something like tectonics in the mentality of the general mental design, you can't explain something as simple as why does the sea not get totally salty? We've had enough years, right? But there's some excuse of you could imagine going to the moon and looking back and seeing the blue world. We did that. It gives us a different point of view. You probably can't quite imagine going to the other side of the Saturn rings and then looking through and seeing the pale blue dot. That's probably a step too far if you're not quite sure of what's up there. You know, the moon, pretty big, seems to be relatively close. That's inside the crystal sphere, but Saturn's a bit far out. We don't, it wasn't until 1600s almost that we knew there were 4 moons around Jupiter, none of which were divided. The other 90 odd that we now know about aren't in there either. So there's limits. But give them a bit of credit, not too much, but a bit. But particularly looking at some of the Christian people who are pushing for concern or remediation in climate change terms, they keep using the New Testament phrases about stewardship, which is very close to what we had with Braiding Sweetgrass, but where it's you need to play your role within the bigger whole and not just be extracted. Like much of of the Old Testament is so extractive in many respects. You've been given this, so go use it. All of the plants and animals are here for your benefit. Why would you therefore not be extracted?
Well,
Whereas if
you mentioned in the past when we were talking about the the Naomi Oreskes book, you mentioned that woman in Texas, who tries to use that stewardship argument
the
to
woman in
promote
Texas is
environmentalism.
Catherine Hayhoe.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yep.
I
Yeah.
think been fired from her Washington job, but I haven't seen her actually exit the Nature Conservancy Council.
Yeah. Well, it's the stewardship thing also. Go ahead.
She's Canadian, but she's just out of University in Texas. I'm not quite sure how she splits her time. But Trump's second term, I didn't think she'd last long. But seems to.
Well, the stewardship thing also kind of leads to the thing that he's talking about in his third interlude. Was that within our scope today? I don't even know.
Third was yes.
Okay. About what do we do with all of the extra people, which seems to be relevant to the moment with AI as well.
Yeah.
And he did identify the previous sections, previous chapters. He did identify, everything that every vehicle that has a driver is kind of fair game for disruption. And then he also, talks a little bit about higher ed and obvious. I mean, it's been obvious for a long time that the only thing that higher ed has going for it is that they're holding a gun to everybody's head with accreditation. But how long can that continue?
But he also mentioned about the tragedy of the commons, and obviously the push So that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s all came from the Christian eugenicist side of the argument.
Well, yeah, and did you get the sense that I got the sense kind of that
And
he wasn't completely up to date
but,
on response,
more
on the
currently,
response
I mean,
to,
I noticed that
to Garrett
uh,
Hardin in the same way that
for
he wasn't,
example,
he wasn't.
in the open access. The open access is given to you by the internet via possible AI-driven data centers that are, of course, just consuming all the water and in some places all the electricity. So now we need to rack that even more from a climate point of view.
Hmm.
So
Well, yeah,
for all the ice because I need the ice for the whiskey.
well, so that's the future being not evenly distributed.
I said whiskey, not best.
Um, yeah,
But I think he tells quite a good story. I think in general, I'm
mhm,
sure, as we've already pulled up in many cases. But also, there are gaps, and some of it, as I think Chris was the one who mentioned it, we have to be very careful not falling into the trap of thinking it was written yesterday.
mhm,
Or it's 10 years old. Us,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
just
It's
after mobile phones, smartphones became a thing, nothing
yeah,
about.
yeah,
But it's post the iPhone, but not much post the iPhone.
yeah. I'm
Especially when
right. No,
iPhone
the
7
iPhone is still pretty
were out.
shiny at that point. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I've gotten to the point. I'm scrolling along as we're talking, and I've gotten to the point of the humors now, and I'm kind of looking at them again, and I'm just sort of, I mean, the thing that sort of jumps out at me is how kind of arbitrary they are.
Hmm.
Theocracy and abundance. The other ones, the later ones kind of make sense, although he sticks the invisible hand in there too. The other ones being sort of related to characters kind of makes sense. I might have put Hobbes in there, for example.
Hmm.
That might have stood for something. But he along the way he also sort of calls out in the abundance one especially. He sort of calls out the Roddenberry universe, right? The Star Trek future of abundance and all of that. And I do think that at least as sort of an impressionistic, what is what are the ideas, and the humor is really the temperament, kind of floating around, the Bay Area in, the early 2010s. Probably the Star Trek universe is kind of an interesting one because that's not, you know, the 1990s turn of the century. That's the 2010s. That's after the crash. That's after, sort of the first. I mean, by the time this comes out, yeah, the iPhone's out, right?
Hmm.
Facebook exists,
Yeah.
Twitter exists.
Yeah.
So this is kind of, I mean, it's a decade ago, but it's kind of the world we're living in.
Hmm. Yeah, that was part of the piece where he was talking about sort of data science, other things, and what would be possible.
Mhm.
And a lot of what he was talking about, what would be possible, had been done by Facebook for quite a while.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and I knew a couple of the uh, eh, social analytics folks that started the social analytics at Facebook that
Mhm.
came out of MIT. And some of the stuff they were doing early on was just, it was really interesting
Yeah.
from a perspective of not knowing what that would lead to. But they were able to tell weeks, they knew somebody would, people would start dating before the people would know that they would start dating just
Mm.
by patterns and
Mhm.
interaction patterns.
Mhm.
And it
Wow.
was it was really bizarre. And they were like walking me through stuff. I'm just like, crud, this is, and it was just all based on social interaction patterns, on just sort of how things start. And they're just like, okay, here's probability. And they were able to do that really well. But then able to just sort of frame all sorts of other things really well. And they're like, oh, here's this group. And it just sort of, like, looking back to where, like, about 10 years ago and sort of post um, uh, Lanier's book, of Facebook going, oh, we can't do anything. We're not really seeing this. There's no way to algorithmically do this stuff. They knew that there was from very early days.
Mhm.
And it was just, and they were also sort of leaning into how can we, increase engagement and so forth based on this,
Yeah.
which is where sort of the early social analytic researchers left. And they're like, we don't exactly like where this is going.
Mhm.
Like, we're going to cash out our stocks and like
Right.
take our stocks with us and just go hang out for a while. And they did quite well because of it.
Well, it's kind of what Chamath did too, to an extent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like because he when he went, when he did that Stanford talk, he sort of fessed up a little bit to the,
Yeah.
his feelings about, what he had done on their
Yep.
behalf. Yeah, it's interesting that the science fiction aspect of it, the whole Morlocks and Eloi and all of that, I think I mean, I found it interesting just because I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of I felt like, oh, I could have a conversation with Jaron about, sci-fi. And then actually after listening to that, I went down a little rabbit hole on YouTube with people, sort of reviewing, I don't know what it was, comparing Dune with the Star Wars universe,
Mm.
Galactic,
Huh.
and Foundation. There was another one that did Foundation versus
Yeah.
the Galactic Empires. And then I went down this whole A.E. Van Vogt rabbit hole, and the whole idea that that these people were so and apparently Frank Herbert was as well, right? He had a Dianetics franchise,
Hmm.
um, and Van Vogt was reading, general semantics, and put all of that into his Null, stories. Um, I mean, that whole thing though struck me as kind of so weird, because the other thing that I learned about Van Vogt that was obvious, but I didn't have a name for it, was that everything all of his novels were what he called fix-ups, right? Where
Huh.
he would take things that he had written in like one-off stories or sometimes serialized stories, like the weapon shops, and he would turn them into novels. And and along the way, in order to do that, he sometimes had to change things,
Yeah.
change the story world a little, change the characters a little bit. It's kind of funny though that there's always, sort of, and I think this fits in with kind of the Silicon Valley humor, right? There's always a
Hmm.
Superman, right? You can't, yeah, it's not enough that there's non-Aristotelian logic in the Null series. You've got to have the guy with two brains, right? Who's actually a freaking remnant of an alien invasion or something. Um, you can't have just the weapon shops, which are a cool idea, but you've got to have the immortal man who, Robert Cadron or whatever his name is, who set it up. And then you've got to have the spider aliens who capture him. And it's like, dude, you're on it. But it's fun.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was a little off topic, I guess. But maybe not, because I think this whole psychedelic experience and the psychedelic nature of 60s Bay Area life, which
Hmm.
which although, and I kind of mentioned before, MK Ultra. And the reason I did was because I had just read that book Chaos, right, which was about sort of about MK Ultra and Manson, but
Hmm.
also very much about that, kind of a whole big conspiracy theory about that time was going on, which to whatever extent it it touches reality is probably weirdly interesting for this whole.
And there's
Yeah.
I think Steve Hold on, let me double check. Stephen Levy's What the Dormouse,
Yes.
and just sort of about the intersection of sort of hippie culture, LSD,
Yep.
technology, and Defense Department. This odd intersection of everything.
Yeah. It's what the
Um,
was said, right? Is that the
yeah, I think so.
yeah. It was kind of funny. I was looking for that at the when I was getting ready to teach a little course in the history of high tech, and I wasn't able to find it, and I didn't realize that it was cited in this book because when I heard it, it reminded me of it. But and the thing that I found instead was The Soul of a New Machine, which was nowhere
Oh
near
yeah,
as helpful to me.
yeah.
I think we've also talked about this at one point. The
Oh
Fred
yeah.
Turner
Hmm.
book.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of these kind of philosophies, that were, or approaches, or yeah, I think maybe humor, maybe he chose a good word when he used humors, um,
Hmm.
that were,
It
Although
it tails
he had to redefine it so people would understand what it was because it's been out of circulation for so long.
yeah, yeah.
it it's tied to the Greek humors, yes?
Yeah.
The
Okay.
Galen's humors, I guess, yeah,
Okay.
but not tightly, not
Yeah.
not tightly bound, yeah,
Yeah. It
like loosely metaphorically, yeah,
yeah, I thought that's where he was going, and then with his definition, I'm like, this isn't exactly where I thought it was
yeah,
going.
yeah.
He specifically cites Hippocrates.
Well,
So
maybe, I mean, and
That would be
at least
Hippocrates
basing it.
Hippocrates predates Galen, so maybe that is a
yeah.
looser um,
Although,
kind of approach.
as we talk about ancient kind of medicine and metaphysics, I was so happy for her that she caught it this week, but apparently it was a discussion that started in school. There
Hmm.
was some group of cisgender white men who were just going bonkers over this week's news. And she's like, it's odd that there's a group of women who get up in arms every time there's a school shooting, and all the white men just say, "Oh, they're hysterical." They're
Oh,
just crazy. But when white men do it, somehow it's okay.
they don't
And
have.
I was like, well, like you should look up the etymology of the word hysterical,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
to see just how insanely gendered that thing has been for not just now, but for
Forever. Forever.
thousands and thousands of years.
Yep.
And
Yep.
she did, and she's like, "Oh my God."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and how it hasn't really gone away. I mean, it's below the waterline now, where we don't
Yeah.
acknowledge it, right? But it's still there, and
Well, it's become so commonplace. But it's washed up. But you almost never hear
Mhm.
someone refer to a man as hysterical.
Nope.
Just
Hmm.
it's one of those super quietly gendered words.
Hmm.
Kind of like,
Hmm.
you never use the word spry for someone who's young.
Mm.
So, it's hey, we can use this as a political word to tag somebody with for being
Mhm.
surreptitiously old,
Yeah.
which, gives us, I think Tim may have already said West Wing this week, but,
Yes. Yep. Yeah, well,
drink.
yeah. So, right. West Wing. So a couple of other ideas that come along are or metaphors or tools that he uses are biodiversity and local maxima.
Hmm.
So well, and also, I mean, and I the whole shower knobs thing, right? And the two diagrams, the implication of the shower knobs and
Yeah.
the back and forth adjustment thing of the shower knobs, which actually made me laugh this time I read it, because my shower sucks. I mean, I'm in a 110-year-old building,
Hmm.
and and I'm on the third floor. The boilers are in the basement, and depending on the time of morning, I might get scalded or I might freeze, or both things might happen, in rapid succession. But the thing that struck me about those two diagrams is is that the second one, or is it the second one? The one with the one with the that bounces around a lot is all about taking more samples, right? So,
Hmm.
obviously N is larger in the grainy, jump diagram that jumps around a lot, which, how much of it is just that? Um, when
Hmm.
we're looking at so is it the bi, is is biodiversity? I mean, not biodiversity isn't a bad metaphor, but
Hmm.
but maybe it's, and it's weird because I don't know if it's in um I don't remember. I don't know if it's in the Black Swan or which book it's in, which of Taleb's books it's in, but there's one where he goes off on this long rant about the number of times that you sample a system, or that you check, right? The more noise you're going to get versus,
Hmm.
right? Like if you check your portfolio once a year and make adjustments, then it's mostly signal
Hmm.
analytics. But if you check, monthly, it adds noise. If you check weekly, it adds noise. If you check daily, or if you're online, in real time, then it's almost all noise. Which
Hmm.
is
Well, it's
kind of
a
interesting.
question is it in the checking or is it in the system itself that's got the
Absolutely right
noise?
form. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to, if you check your boiling pot, it's all signal building in one direction because you've got the heat on and it's gonna boil up and you know where it's going in the first place.
Hmm.
You're looking at a Wall Street that just bounces up and down.
Yeah.
Anything less than 1% generally is the level of the noise in the system itself
Hmm.
versus
Right. So maybe the
Yeah.
question is how do can you figure out how to calibrate your samples
Hmm.
so that you don't exceed that threshold.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's having enough data. So you need the small data, but you also need to be able to do trend analysis over time
Right.
and figuring out just sort of that time view gives you overall trend.
Hmm.
And then like the daily and more incremental, you're seeing a whole lot of noise and an awful lot of micro trends
Hmm.
in figuring out just sort of figuring out the edges from the norms and,
Hmm.
forest for the trees.
Right. Well, it is kind of
Um,
interesting, watching like a 60-day moving average. Uh,
yeah.
you know,
well, it's a lot of inputs going in, which is why
Yep.
people like uh, a lot of people will like Dodd and Graham's fundamentals of a business,
Hmm.
and you look at what the business is actually doing and producing and how it's functioning. But then you have the added noise of the rest of the markets, what's happening in culture, what's happening in society, or these days, are tariffs on or are they off?
Yep.
Or are they pushed
yeah.
off another
Right.
30 days?
Right.
You know,
Well, and then, and it's kind of funny because I remember, I took, when I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, I took some, business school classes. And I remember, having to read, Michael Porter,
Hmm.
case studies and, of like, Lincoln Bank and this and that. And it's like, okay, but I mean, talk about controlling the narrative.
yeah.
It's like,
Well,
these are,
the Oracle of Omaha would tell you, look at just the core business itself and how the business is doing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's the most signal you're going to get. And all the rest of it is going to be noise up and down and around that you can't control for.
Right.
So, but if you're a long-term investor, looking at the fundamentals of that business and what's roughly going on in tangential businesses around it, you're going to be way better off in the long run because you're getting all signal And then the other things you either don't know or can't know are the noise up and down. Maybe you could guess at broadly where the broader market is going, and that may help a little as a secondary effect, but
Mhm.
all the
Mhm.
rest of it,
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah,
going to be.
which assumes that he's living in a world of focused firms and not conglomerates, right? So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah.
Or multi-conglomerates, which it was one of the things that I kept coming up when, and I think it was the chapter 4 and 5-ish economic stuff, that it's a point that's made by Cesar Hidalgo in his How Information Grows is
Mm.
there's he coins the term person byte. An individual person can only know so much,
Mhm.
Mhm.
but you add 2 or 3 people together and their combined knowledge then goes much further,
Mhm.
and you can have a firm, and your firm can have a firm byte's worth of all the people combined and their knowledge.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then you go beyond that to a mega conglomerate like a Google that not only has the people bytes and the firm bytes and multiple firm bytes because Google's multiple companies under one bigger umbrella, but
Mhm.
because they have the computing power to do it, they're sitting at a much higher level of information in terms of what they can and can't do with it,
Mhm.
that they're so much further ahead of the rest of us. Or a company like a Walmart that can form and change supply chains that make it harder for others to compete because they have such dominance over those supply chains.
Mhm.
Or companies like an Amazon that they've got so much more data than individual companies within their ecosystem. Yeah, I could be doing well making cases for phones, but Amazon can figure out where in China I'm having them made,
Right.
call up that company and say, make the same thing for us, and we'll shave a couple of dollars off of the price. And
Right.
suddenly I don't have that
Right.
data
And
to
and
control
we'll
my
buy a
business.
billion of them so you can charge us half the price.
Yeah, and they can get economies of scale that I, as an individual, and because I've given my data to Amazon as my platform for sales,
Mhm.
I can't protect against that,
Right.
which is why countries like India have specifically created laws to vitiate against those types of things, which I think impinges on a lot of what Lanier is saying here is Amazon Siren Server, literally from a manufacturing perspective, can take over in ways that we would not have expected, and literally putting, small businesses out of existence.
Right. Which I think is a good point that he makes. But historically, it's also kind of just an automation of a process that was already happening, 100 years ago with,
Yeah.
with this, with the formation of trusts and, and cartel agreements, and all of that stuff that, not so much the Sherman Act, but the Clayton Act was designed to try to fight. Oh, cool, thanks.
Mhm.
Said, yeah. And so, yeah, so the idea that, I mean, it's a much more automated, streamlined, powerful way to do, a thing that
Well, it's the
isn't.
same thing as the Industrial Revolution. I can set up a factory
Mhm.
to with a programmed loom,
Yep,
and it's going to put a lot of people who are spinning yarn at home in the countryside out of business
absolutely.
because I can do it at a bigger mass scale and take economies
Mhm.
into account that, Joe weaving at home or
Right,
Sarah weaving at home can't do.
right,
Although you also now have things like Etsy where individual sellers are trying to recreate those things and use the bigger platform to leverage it out. But even then, all the value is going to the platform. The same way Uber is taking all of the value of the workers driving the cars And all the real value is going to Uber rather than to the driver of the car who's doing the actual work.
Yeah.
And there's no easy way to unionize against Uber or Amazon, unless political climate and currents change dramatically, which I think is kind of what he's arguing in this book broadly is, how do you unionize in a technology-based world?
Right. Right.
He's not really getting at that specifically, or at least that I've seen thus far.
Well, yeah,
And
and I think the way I think that it was probably beyond where we were supposed to read to 11 today, right?
yeah.
I think it's beyond that, but he does start it, later talking about, and it seems to me, and I haven't gotten quite to the end yet, but it seems to me that his hope is that one store, right? He starts talking about, how one store is ultimately better than many stores. And I think that is going to be part of sort of where he seeks a solution. Is the idea.
Or one store can be better than lots of stores, but it has to be regulated and overseen and watched the same way one president can be the best president, but
For whom? Yeah.
if you choose the wrong one,
Who's
then
best president? My best president.
or you've got to be able to find one that can, he makes the analogy in one of the earlier chapters about you engineer a thing and you think it's perfect, but you have an iPhone and you don't want any buttons on it. But how do you turn the damn thing on or off? Like you're always got to make some tweak or change. And even small changes can have massive ripple effects in the thing you're doing. So even if you can't anticipate those, how do you fix those issues?
Well, and then he's also, kind of the next thing that he goes into, I guess in chapter 11, our last chapter, is sort of network effects. And he does talk about, the difference. He talks about the local global flip, but, which sort of calls attention to the difference between locality and global, globality or whatever. And, and I think that is kind of really an issue of, with what underneath what you're saying, Chris, is, where and when. I don't think that we know, and I don't think that he tells us, conclusively, when we're better off being global rather than local, being kind of universal rather than particular. And I think that's more, maybe a bigger, more general, kind of a formulation of that. When is it better to be universal and when is it better to be particular?
I was waiting for his disaggregation of global disaggregating, which then turns around and helps things that are local. And he didn't so far. He hasn't done that.
Well, we've mentioned that, the future is everywhere. It's just not evenly distributed. The same thing is going on now in modern culture. And it's one of the things that's made a massive shift is and the right is very anti-globalization because we got there first and had the benefits first, but but now the middle class has disappeared because all that middle class has been offshored to India, to China, to all these small countries that are willing to, to quote West Wing yet again, sew soccer balls with their teeth.
Right. Yeah. Well, and everybody in America didn't learn to code, apparently.
So that balance has shifted off, and globalization has, and that's one of the issues that I see always is where do you find space for the humanity in what's happening, which is where I see a massive imbalance in Hidalgo's How Information Grows is, yes, there is the person and the person byte, and then there's the Google and the Google byte. But should Google be ruling the earth in politics and what's going on, given their money and the value that they have and have created? Or should we always keep the the rule at the level of human and humanism
Right.
versus
Or local or regional or,
and I
you
one
know,
of the issues that
watershed, right? To go back
well
to what Tim was saying one time.
one of the and I remember you mentioned it too, Dan, because you were talking about the history of law. Over time, we slowly, America and our zeal for capitalism has given almost too much power to corporations to rule who we are and what we're doing.
Mhm.
And from a legal perspective, most corporations are treated as people
Yes.
and they
Immortal.
can own things and they can do things, but they are also extra legal in the fact that a corporation can accidentally kill 100,000 people,
Mhm.
but it's the corporation is never held to account. Or Bear Stearns can kind of go bankrupt, but is
Mhm.
it really held to account, or are we going to bail them out
Right.
because it's a corporation and it's too big to fail?
Mhm.
Because we think that's going to adversely affect the human part of the equation,
Mhm.
or should we just let it die or get rid of it and say, you know what, Google has, or Facebook, or whatever it is, has done something that's so bad, we should either imprison the corporate leadership or we should ban and break up the
Right.
monopoly that they hold on whatever that thing is and let something else use those ideas and rebuild in a better way, which is
Right.
a more human centric thinking way of thinking about it. But
Mhm.
how do you balance who has that power? If a corporation has got the value of humans, or let's say Google decides they want to impact the next election, they easily could do that, and they've got the money and the finance
Mhm.
the same way Elon Musk did, because a lot of his corporation's value is literally bound up in his own purse book. So
Right.
for a couple 100 million, he can say, you know, it's this is a drop in the bucket to me.
Sure.
Here's the outcome I want, and I can give myself a lot more power by
Yeah.
buying an election.
Well, and the difficulty is, and I think the thing that until Elon has had held some people back, although not necessarily the Koch brothers, was that then you own the consequences,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and
Well, but that's because his identity is so closely tied to the value of his companies, whereas
yes,
the Koch brothers knew better than to publicly
at
throw
degrees of
themselves
separation.
out there.
Hmm.
We only know who the Koch brothers are because people are know to watch the money, but it's
Yeah.
much harder. How do you boycott the Koch brothers?
Oh, especially
Yeah.
after Citizens United, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, well, so we're kind of out of time, but I did want to, back, so we're kind of at chapter 11. And in chapter 11 he's talking a little bit about virtual reality, and you can craft any world, any scenario. But then he says this is treacherous and deceptive, which I didn't love in the way that he formulated it, but I think it kind of goes back to that question of, when should we be, trying to globalize and universalize, and when should we be trying to, sort of particularize and
well,
um
I thought of it from the perspective of Graeber's. You can figure out and think about what kind of world you want to live in. And maybe it's a VR world, and that's where you go. And it's essentially what plays out in Ready Player One is you have two
Hmm.
realities. You have the reality of the world you live in, but then you can retreat to the reality of the world you'd like to live in as a VR space.
interesting, yeah.
And maybe that's how we solve it is, the siren servers run the world of the actual reality, but then we all go on live off in the matrix instead.
Maybe.
You know,
Maybe, or yeah, or we admit that we are already in the matrix, but then what do we do about it, right? Then,
Hmm.
I mean, because then we're going back to that to the earlier conversation about the assassination, right? Then when does V for Vendetta stop being, a graphic novel and and a cool movie and become a horrible, kind of
yeah.
reality? Um,
Or I was watching a week or two ago, and mostly I was noticing the number of tools of information and knowledge management that were hiding within it. The 2008 movie, was it Wanted with James McAvoy and
Mm.
Morgan Freeman and Angelina Jolie, and the
Oh,
idea,
with the bullet. Yeah.
so they're
Around.
they're able to slow down time to figure out how to move and what to do,
Yeah.
which is something in a fast-paced world, it would be nice to have that superpower.
Oh, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
the root of the movie is this group of people who are taking information that's coming out of a loom that's being woven as fate.
Right. Right.
And they're
Yes,
able
I
to
remember that
carefully
now.
read it and then decide who should live or die.
Yep.
And they ignore the fact that all of their names have come up as marked for death. But in that final scene at the end, you see this kind of dilapidated library where all the books are strewn about. There's papers, but there's tons of file cabinets. There's tons of card indexes, like
Yep.
hiding in the background of that movie.
Yep.
And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is a version of like life is moving too fast for us to keep up with, and
Right.
how are we going to choose to live? So he is a worker bee drone stuck in an office that's just miserable for him.
Yep.
And he leaves that and he goes to this information society
Mm-hmm.
and learns to use this ability to slow things down to figure out who he wants to be. But in doing that,
Right.
at the end of the question, or at the end of the movie, he breaks the fourth wall and he asks the question, who are you? Or he says to himself, who am I? Who am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
And he says, this is what I did today.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
To put the cap on it. But it's a very subtle, and I only really noticed that theme in the movie because I saw a card index hiding behind Morgan Freeman in
Interesting.
one scene, and it's like it's a very subtle,
Yep. Yep.
very subtle theme, but there it is.
Interesting way. Okay, and on that we will close for next week. Why don't we read just to before we get to Ted Nelson? So through the end of part 6 and the 6th interlude, because that'll take us another. It really only takes us about 50 pages. Shall we go beyond that?
Yeah.
All right.
I want to get through the Nelson.
All right, let's get through the Nelson. Let's get past
Up to part 8.
Okay, yeah, we'll go through that. Yeah, okay, through chapter 18 up to part 8. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we get to talk about Ted next time and
Yeah, so it's 80 pages or so.
his mistress.
70.
Yeah, that's not bad. We can do that.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Cool.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good week.
You too.